Empire of Ashes. Episode 5. The Name. Written by Mia. Tomas Vela died with a name on his lips, and the name was not the one I had built 3 months of hatred around, and I knelt on the floor of my father's old harbor office holding a dead man's hand and felt the entire architecture of my revenge come down around me like a building with its keystone pulled.
Salvatore Marchetti.
Dario's father, the old Don, the man who had built the Marchetti Empire out of heat and force across 50 years and then, 8 months ago, had the decency the rest of us were still waiting on and died in his bed, which meant that the man who had ordered my father ruined and then killed, the man I had married into a house to destroy, the man at the bottom of my father's terrified cipher, and the word proof underlined twice, was already in the ground. Beyond my reach. Beyond anyone's. I had walked into the lion's mouth to take my vengeance, and arrived 8 months too late to a grave. I had built my whole self around the killing of him. You have to understand that. For 3 months, through the funeral in the rain, the cold restaurant, the cathedral, every breakfast in that glass loggia, I had been ablaze with a single edge, and the edge was Salvatore Marchetti will pay for my father. I had eaten and slept and married on it. I had let a strange man put a ring on my finger because the ring was a key, and the key was for a door behind which my father's murderer slept. And now the murderer was dead, and the door opened onto nothing, and I knelt on that cold floor and felt myself come unmade in a way the falcon blade had managed 12 hours before. There is no grief quite like the grief of being denied your revenge. It is the grief of discovering that the thing holding you upright was hate, and that the hate has nowhere left to go, and that without it you are just a girl, alone, 20 years old, with no father and no purpose and a dead man's blood drying on her hands. And Dario, who I had accused of murder over the bread, who I had married hating, who had leaned down at our wedding and told me to breathe, Dario had not done it, had not known. He doesn't even know, Vela had said. Racing the dark, it was never Dario. The cold, steady man who'd put his body between me and a falcon blade not 12 hours ago was as much his father's victim as I was. He'd simply inherited the empire and the guilt in the same envelope and never been told what was in it. I would have stayed there longer, drowning in it, except that the dead don't kill themselves, and whoever had put the knife in Tomas Vela had done it within the hour, which meant they were close, which meant they might be coming back, which meant that I was a Marchetti wife kneeling over a fresh corpse with my father's stolen ledger sewn into my coat, and if I wanted to live long enough to understand what I'd just learned, I had to move. I let go of Vela's hand. I closed his eyes because someone should, because he brought me sugared almonds when I was small. And I went out into the gray morning the back way, the way my father had taught me, and I did not run, because running is how you get seen, and I had just become a person it was very dangerous to see. Dario was waiting up when I came through the garden gate at dawn, and he was not calm. I had never seen him not calm. Through the opera, the blade, the dead man on the marble, he had been the eye of every storm, and now he came down the dark lawn toward me fast, and his face was open in a way that stopped me cold, because the careful was gone, and underneath it was something raw and frightened and furious all at once. Where were you? He had my arms. Not hard, but he had them, his hands running over me checking for damage the way he had in the foyer, and his voice was shaking. You disappeared. After the attack in the tunnels, you were there, and then you were gone. Nico said the garden camera caught you leaving alone at 2 in the morning, alone the night the Falcons tried to take you off a foyer floor. Do you have any idea? I had men out. I had the whole city being turned over. I thought he stopped, made himself breathe, the way he'd told me to at the altar. I thought they'd finished what they started. I thought I'd lost you in the dark because I didn't keep close enough watch, and I have been standing in this garden for 4 hours learning exactly what that does to a man. And here's the thing about being married to your enemy and discovering he was never your enemy at all. It leaves you with nowhere to put your hands. I needed air, I said, which was the second lie I told him, and the worst, because I told it to a man whose hands were shaking from fear of losing me, while my coat held the proof that his dead father had murdered my living one. I couldn't breathe in the house after the man on the marble. I walked.
I'm sorry.
I should have told someone. He looked at me for a long moment, and I watched him decide not to believe me and decide not to push it, the way he kept choosing not to push the things he could see I wasn't ready to give. And that mercy was so much harder to bear than cruelty would have been, because I was lying to the one person in that whole rotten city who had never once lied to me. "Don't," he said quietly. "Disappear. Please. Whatever this is, whatever you walked out into the dark to do or to feel, you don't do it alone anymore. That's the one thing I'll ask you that isn't in the arrangement. You let me be where you are, even if you won't tell me why." His thumb moved over my wrist, where the cut bond would have been if we'd been something other than what we were. I can't do the thing my father did to this family. I can't run it on fear and never let anyone close. I'm trying to build something else, and I can't build it if if you keep walking into the dark where I can't follow. I should have said something. A wife would have said something. "I'm sorry, it won't happen again. Hold me." But I was a blade that had just lost its edge, and I stood in the dawn-cold garden looking at this man who'd spent 4 hours imagining my death, and found I had no idea how to be loved, because I'd been a weapon so many months I'd forgotten the language of being a person someone wanted alive.
He saw it.
Of course he saw it. He saw everything. And instead of pushing, he did the thing that nearly broke me. He took off his own coat, the beautiful black coat he'd worn through the opera and the blood, and put it around my shoulders because I was shivering and hadn't noticed, slow, hands visible, asking nothing, the way you gentle a frightened animal. The coat smelled of him and of the long, terrible night. I pulled it closed without meaning to, and I understood I was in catastrophic trouble, the kind no ledger could fix, because the man my father's killer had forced me to marry was, against every plan I'd ever made, becoming the only warm thing in my life. The one person he didn't finish it. He didn't have to. And God help me. Standing in that garden with his dead father's guilt in my coat, I wanted to finish it for him. I didn't sleep. I sat in the window of the bride's cage they'd built me before I ever said yes, and I took my father's ledger out of my coat lining for the first time inside the Marchetti walls, and now that I had the name, the 6th line, the one I'd never been able to crack, the one beside proof underlined twice, came apart in my hands like it had only ever been waiting for the key. It was not a confession of my father's murder. It was so much worse than that, and I finally understood why a careful man had hidden it behind a wall and died of it. My father hadn't just discovered that Salvatore Marchetti was bleeding him. He discovered why the old Don needed money badly enough to bleed a dozen honest shippers in his last years, that the Marchetti Empire, the thing the whole city feared, had been hollow at the end, mortgaged in secret to the Commission and to the Falcons both, played off against each other by a dying man too proud to show weakness. The proof in my father's ledger wasn't a weapon against the Marchetti's strength. It was a map of their weakness, the exact shape of how broke and how exposed and how killable the family really was, and if it ever reached the Falcons, they would not need a war. They would simply walk in and take everything and put every Marchetti in the ground, starting with the new young Don who'd inherited his father's debts and never been told their size. Starting with Dario and Sofia. the girl who'd brought me the Milan dress and told me to be cleverer than I thought I needed to be. I sat in the dawn with the thing I'd come for finally in my hands, the weapon that could end the Marchetti family, the vengeance I'd married into a house to take, and understood that it had curdled, in one night, into the exact opposite of itself. It wasn't a sword anymore. It was a bomb with my own new family sitting on top of it, and I was the only person alive who knew the fuse existed. I thought about burning it. Sitting in the gray window with the thing in my hands, I thought about holding my father's ledger to the lamp and letting the proof that could avenge him become ash, because keeping it was keeping a loaded gun pointed at Dario's head and Sophia's and my own. And I couldn't. My hand wouldn't do it. Not because I still wanted vengeance. The vengeance had died with Salvatore in his comfortable bed, but because it was the last thing my father ever made. He had spent the final frightened year of his life building it, in a cipher of his own invention behind a wall, and he had died with it underlined twice, and burning it felt like burying him a second time with my own two hands. So I had a weapon I couldn't use and couldn't destroy, in a house full of people it would kill, and a husband I was falling for who would be the first to die if I was clumsy with it. 3 months ago, I'd have called that a good morning's work. Now I only felt sick and tired and 19 kinds of trapped, and underneath all of it, traitorous and growing, something almost like the wish that I had married Dario Marchetti for no reason at all except that, once, at an altar, he'd told me to breathe. Nico found me at breakfast because of course he did. Dario had gone to deal with the body, Vela's body, which had been found by the harbor police at dawn, and which the family would now have to manage, the way they managed everything, with money in the right pockets and a story for the papers. So it was Nico who sat down across from me with his boxer's patience and his flat, cold eyes, and poured himself coffee he didn't drink, and watched me with the particular attention of a man doing arithmetic. "Bad business, the lawyer," he said.
Vela.
"You knew him, didn't you? Your father's man." He let it sit. Robbery, the police think. Office turned over. Strongbox emptied. Terrible thing, this city. Another silence, longer, and I made myself eat, made my hand stay steady on the cup the way 3 months of practice had taught me, because Nico was not a man you flinched in front of. "Funny, though," he went on gently. "The camera on the garden gate. You leaving 2 a.m. The lawyer, dying across town about that same hour. A wife who needed air." He smiled, and it did not touch his eyes. "I've served this family 30 years, Mrs. Marchetti. I served the old Don before I served the young one. And the thing about serving the old Don for 30 years is you learn to notice when someone's gone looking for the things he buried. He buried them deep, Salvatore, for good reason. And I made him a promise at the end that I'd keep them buried, whatever it took, whoever came digging.
Even now.
Especially now." He stood and buttoned his jacket and looked down at me, and the cold in him was the patient cold of a man who has put people in the ground for love of a dead master. "Dario doesn't know what his father did. I'd like to keep it that way. The boy's trying to build something clean, and a clean thing can't carry what I carried for the old man. So whatever you found in the dark, Mrs. Marchetti, whatever your father wrote down before he died, you and I should talk about where it is.
Soon.
For everyone's sake. Before someone digs up something that gets this whole family killed." And he walked out, leaving his coffee untouched, and I sat in the Marchetti house holding a cup that did not shake only because I would not let it, and understood, finally and completely, the shape of the trap I was in. The man who killed my father was dead. The proof that could avenge him would instead murder the man I was falling for. And the one person in the house who knew I had it was a 30-year killer who'd sworn a dead Don to keep it buried, and who had just, very politely, told me that he knew and that he was patient, and that patience has a bottom. I had walked into the lion's mouth carrying a torch, certain I was the hunter. I was beginning to understand I had never once, from the very first day, been the most dangerous thing in the room. To be continued. That was episode 5 of Empire of Ashes. If this one has its hooks in you, the next episode is already waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The complete book is on Amazon, and early episodes plus Dario POV bonus scenes are on my Patreon. Links are in the description.
I've Mia.
Thank you for listening.